Now, I'm no dummy, and you're not a dummy either, but I do love Portishead's Dummy. That's a ridiculous way to start this episode, but hey, that's kind of maybe why you're here, because you like a little bit of the ridiculousness that I bring to music. At least that's what I hope. But anyway, yes, we are talking about the quintessential, one of the biggest 90s trip-hop albums to come out of Bristol that really defines this sound, and we're going to talk about it today on Waterproof Records. So let's get into it, right? It's the right vibes, the right feeling. It's cooler, it's crisper. We're getting into the winter months, and it's time to talk about Portishead's Dummy. Let's go.
Things are gonna change, I can feel it.
If this gonna be that kind of party, I'm gonna...
Waterproof Records. Waterproof Records with Jacob Gibbons.
I've been looking forward to doing this one. This is a really, really great album that is fun to listen to again and again, which is what I always do before I choose one of my albums to cover on Waterproof Records. But before we can get into the deliciousness that is Dummy, let's talk about DistroKid, my sponsor for this show, and how they help me make it possible. DistroKid, as I tell you every time, is a way to get your music out in the world, and I have a special link that gives you 30% off your first year. So don't forget to use that. It's just distrokid.com/VIP/waterproof. If you click on that link, which it's in the bios, it's in all my links, you click on it, you register, you get that saving for uploading your music for your first year. They're a great way to get all of your art out into the world, so make sure you go use DistroKid, my special link, and then that way everybody at DistroKid's like, yay, you watch Jacob and you love his show, and that's how you got this link. So, I mentioned up top that it's cooler. And if you watch this episode, which the majority of you listen, but if you watch this episode, I am in a flannel. I'm in a blue flannel, one that matches the color of this album cover, and that was just coincidental. I looked over and I was like, hey, all right, we're just coordinating, me and Portishead. But it is cooler, and this is going to be a lot more fun for me to record episodes in this space because I'm not burning up. I'd much rather be cold. I don't know about you, but I'm one of these people that I'm always a little hot. I run hot in life. I run hot when I sleep in bed at night and on summer days and summer months. Sometimes LA gets to be a little bit too warm for me. I belong in a much cooler climate, and one day I hope to depart this hot city and live in a place that's a little bit cooler and a little bit more me. But for now, I'll just keep sweating through the months and then get into the lovely, gorgeous time that is the fall, winter, and spring. I mean, we are a little spoiled here, let's be honest. Southern California, the majority of the year, it's absolutely lovely to live here. It's just the summers. Oof. But Portishead, which when I was in high school and I first heard this band, so this album comes out August 22nd, 1994. That would be the summer after my freshman year, going into my sophomore year in high school. That's when this would happen. And when I first hear the name Portishead, I don't think one thing or another about that name. It just kind of sounded cool and interesting and fascinating. It wouldn't be until years later that I would learn that that is a name of a fishing city in England. And I would find out that Portishead is an area. It's a place you can move to. You can live in Portishead. I always just thought it was a cool name when I was growing up. And then you find out later it was named after it. And if you were curious as to how they just decided randomly to choose it as a name, well, it turns out that, well, first I'll list the members of this band that are Portishead, because primarily there are three. There are Beth Gibbons, there's Jeff Barrow, and there's Adrian Utley. Those are the three that make up Portishead. But there's the honorary, sometimes referred to as the fourth member of Portishead, which is Dave McDonald, who was their audio engineer on the first two albums, helped produce them. And so he's given some credit. But the three that make up the band are Beth, Jeff, and Adrian. And getting back to how they picked the name of Portishead, it really just comes about with Jeff at the time is working with Nana Cherry, and I think one of their A&R guys is reading a magazine, and it's saying that Nana Cherry is working with the guys from Portishead, and they're just referring to where Jeff and Adrian are from. And that is how they're like, hey, that's a great name for a band. So they just decide to call their band Portishead. And that's how we land on that name. But what's more interesting is how this band comes together. So I did a little bit of research because obviously I'm not from over there. I don't live in that part of the world. But I learned about something new when I was doing my digging in and my recent research on this album. They had a thing in England which doesn't happen anymore, and it was basically called Enterprise Allowance Day. It was instituted by Margaret Thatcher, and they several times in interviews, Jeff and Adrian call it Humiliation Day. So to sum up what it is the English government basically set up a program that if you're unemployed, you could get money each day as long as you were trying to be an entrepreneur and start a business. Now, but the way that you did that is you have to say, I want to be an independent business person. I want to start a business. And then you have to attend this enterprise allowance course, which is you have to sit in a room and learn about how to build your business. And a lot of other people are going to be there at the same time. Now, this is where Beth Gibbons and Jeff Barrow meet each other for the first time. They're going in, and like Jeff said in an interview, he was like, you got as much money to be unemployed as employed, as long as you said you wanted to start a business. So they go to this event, they're sitting there and they meet over coffee because here's Beth Gibbons. She's saying she wants to be a singer and he's wanting to be, a producer and creator of music. So they come together and they decide we should try to work together. Now at the time, Jeff is around 19 years old. This is in 1991. It's like 19 years old. Beth is, I believe, 27. She's a few years older than him. And they begin working together. And at the time, Jeff Barrow is working to help produce Neneh Cherry's next album. And he's been working with her. So Beth Gibbons and Jeff Barrow are in Neneh Cherry's kitchen. And this is where they first dream up the first song that they write together, which is It Could Be Sweet, which is on this album. This is the first piece of music that they write together. And it is also the piece of music that when they're recording it at Coach House Studios, Adrian is working in the studios as a session guitar player. And he hears this song playing upstairs. He hears the door open and he hears these heavy beats. And he hears Beth's haunting, beautiful voice over them. And he's like, what is this? I need to get involved. That's what happens. And this is where they all meet. And the interesting thing is that Adrian, being a session guitar player and somebody who's worked in producing and making music for a while, is 34. Now, I tell you this because I didn't know this secret ingredient of Portishead. I never knew the age differences between the three members, and I think it's something worth pointing out. Because if you have a 19-year-old, a 27-year-old, and a 34-year-old coming together, you have three different POVs. These aren't people that are separated by just a couple years. They're enough to be, the person who is in middle school or, sixth grade and that person's graduating. Those are some gaps that you're going to be experiencing completely different pop culture, different music, different technologies that you're exposed to as you're a teenager, as you're growing up. And here comes Adrian Utley, who loves film scores and has a collection of records and from spy movies, and he's got this old vinyl with these cool sounds. And then you've got Jeff, who's younger and understands the concepts of sampling so much more clearly because he comes up from that time. So he understands how to utilize samples and beats and whatnot. And then you have Beth Gibbons, her style, the tone of her voice, the way that she sounds when she sings, this kind of yearning, sorrowful voice. You put that on top and where she's coming from, and that's Portishead. That's Portishead. That's why this thing comes together. Now, on other shows, you hear me talk about how I don't want to just go track by track and sit there and break down every song. On this album, I think that one thing that's interesting about trip hop and albums like this is they are like cookbooks. You do kind of want to dissect the piece of music a little bit. Whereas I feel like if you're talking about Alice in Chains' Dirt, or you're talking about Soundgarden's Super Unknown, or whatever album you're talking about, there are specific songs or feelings or riffs or things like that that come together, but it's not always easy to sit there and go, let's go track by track and tell the story of how this song came together. But with trip hop, it is recipes, ingredients, combining a lot of different soundscapes. And there was a word that I came across as I was researching that I thought was so cool, that they said that dummy and this type of music really created, which was hauntology. That's a cool word, hauntology, the sampling of older spectral sounds to evoke deeper cultural memories. So cool, right? Hauntology. So that's what brings this album together. And I have covered one other trip hop album on Waterproof Records so far, which would be Massive Attack's Mezzanine. And I chose that one first, and I can't remember if I said it in the episode. I chose that one first because it had more staying power, I guess, involvement in my life. I mean, look, one reason, because I find, and this is all personal taste, I find Mezzanine to be dark, creepy, but sexually charged. And so it has a lot more of a, I don't know, it's a little randy, makes me feel those things. But Portishead's Dummy, and you could easily create a trip hop playlist that would be for just getting it on. You definitely could. But for some reason, Portishead's Dummy, it has a loneliness to it. There's a sorrowful feeling, and it has a lot to do with Beth Gibbons's vocal style and the spy tones. It gets very noir for me. It's very cinematic, but it's very noir. And when I listen to this album, it's like being in a black and white film and looking out a window and, being the gumshoe that's like smoking a cigarette, and you walk in your office and there's a dame there, and there's something about it where you're like walking the city streets and you're wondering, can I trust anyone again? It's like there's just something. When I made my video, my real TikTok about this, I chose Sour Times, and I totally did the black and white sunglasses, fedora, trench coat, kind of secretive vibe. And I think that some people's reactions to Dummy or Portishead is, maybe they also find that sexual energy that comes from the beats and the movements of trip hop, but it doesn't go there for me as much. And so while this is as an important album to me as Mezzanine by Massive Attack, I chose that one first because I've just probably listened to it more in the long run. Why, Jacob? Are you saying you're getting down and dirty too often? I don't know. Am I? Wink. But let's get back to Portishead and how this all comes together. And now we've got these three people combining together their music to create their sound. Now, this album will go on to become a massive hit. Triple platinum, Mercury Prize. I mean, it's heralded of the time of the 90s as probably one of the most important albums. I don't know if we knew that at the time. My brother had it. My brother had the album. I didn't have it initially. I remember him having Portishead. But you want to know the piece of music that made me lose my mind over this album, over this band? It was a B-side on the Sour Time single, I think. I should have researched that. You should have researched that, Jacob. The name of the song was called To Kill a Dead Man. To Kill a Dead Man. This was the theme song that I think it might even actually be called the theme from To Kill a Dead Man. The band made a short film, and the short film is like spies, assassins, espionage, noir, and the film is called To Kill a Dead Man, and they write a piece of music, and it's very spy, it's very noir. But I heard this piece of music. I used to sit in my room and put it on and just escape into that world. As somebody who writes scripts and has made movies, this was definitely in my cinematic brain. I mean, so much of music is for me, like I rock out and I enjoy a lot of different types of music, but so much of music is that I go to a place in my mind where I envision a scene, whether of a story that I'm kind of writing. Sometimes I'll create entire playlists based on a feeling if I'm writing a script or a story. But sometimes it's just I put myself in a scenario or I paint a picture mentally of a place. And when I first heard To Kill a Dead Man, it really had an impact on me. More than any other piece of music on that album at first. But, so you know, the cover of the album, that is I have it up on the display here. It's just solid blue, top and bottom, you know. And then this frame that's Beth Gibbons in the film To Kill a Dead Man, and that is a frame from the movie. And they used it there, and this really does this spy 60s, 70s, Cold War era sounding music is really identifiable for them. But that's the story behind the cover, and the name Dummy I thought was really interesting. It was based on a 60s television show, 1970s TV drama of the same name that was about a young deaf woman in Yorkshire who becomes a prostitute. And that was from a TV drama in the 1970s called Dummy. So you get this sense of where this album is coming from and the energy behind it. But let's get a little bit into the piece of songs, the cookbook that is Portishead's Dummy. The first song, Mr. Ons, sounds so spacey, right? Sounds like something from outer space. Well, you'd be correct, because the inspiration behind this song is from the puppet series, the Thunderbirds and Captain Scarlet. There was a composer named Barry Gray who composed all the pieces of music for Thunderbirds, Captain Scarlet. And there was an album, a record, and it had this piece of music that was made for Captain Scarlet versus the Mr. Ons. And that is the piece of music where the band hears what sounds like a theremin, and it really inspires Mr. Ons. Now, what you're hearing is not an actual theremin. It is a Roland SH-101 to sound more like a theremin, and it's being manipulated to imitate it. But one thing that I thought was even more interesting is in my research of this song, I learned about an instrument that I didn't even know existed. An instrument that was made in the 1920s. It's a type of synthesizer. And I'm totally gonna fuck up the pronunciation of this because it's French. But the first word is O-N-D-E-S, ondes. And then it's called the ondes martenot. It's very theremin-like. But I looked up videos of this piano, the synthesizer. It looks kind of like an organ, a synthesizer. But they have this ring on the end of it where you put the ring on your finger, and it's like the string ties to this ring, and as you move it up and down, it's pulling on this string, and the tone starts to go woo, like that, like, you know, as we hear on the theremin. Apparently they were used a lot on the Star Trek recordings, but it has a theremin quality to it, but it's very uniquely its own thing as well. And so that apparently was the piece of instrumentation being used on this Barry Gray piece. But so either way, theremin or the ondes martenot, that is what inspired the root of how that song sounds. Now we get to Sour Times, the most famous Portishead song, because it's the big single, introduces the world to this band. And of course, they've released other equally, if not better, music since that song, but it is the one that put them on the map. And it's because there is that spy sound, what you're hearing, that instrumentation there at the beginning that's so, you know, specific to Sour Times, is the cymbalom, also known as the Hungarian hammered dulcimer. Now, they weren't playing it in the studio. It is sampled from Mission Impossible. It was actually from a record called, it was Lalo Schifrin's, am I pronouncing that right? Lalo Schifrin's The Danube Incident. So they're sampling it from Mission Impossible, Lalo Schifrin's The Danube Incident. And then also layered in there, they have Smokey Brooks' Spin It Jig for the beat. So this is that cookbook, right? They have this Mission Impossible spy sounding thing, this spin it jig drum beat, put them together, Sour Times. And then you have Beth coming in saying, "Nobody loves me." Amazing. Really stuck out. It really was unlike anything else we were getting for the most part. Now, if you were in Bristol, if you were in England, you might say, "Oh no, there was a lot of stuff." Yeah, because the Wild Bunch, Massive Attack, Tricky. I've talked about that on the Massive Attack episode. This was an entire scene coming up out of this region, out of Bristol. So for people living over there, it probably didn't seem that out of the ordinary. But for the United States, for the MTV generation, we were getting just spoon-fed, what was popular from grunge that had begun to die down, because now we're getting into the buzz clips, and we're getting all sorts of different types of bands that are here today, gone tomorrow. And then along comes this, and you couldn't deny the fact that it wasn't like anything else out there, right? And the band, Adrian and Jeff, by the way, most of the interviews and information that I found out there were from those two, because Beth famously just didn't do a lot of interviews and much more reclusive. But you would find a lot of interviews with these two, who are very, very good friends and have a good camaraderie together in interviews. It was pretty charming. But they talked about how they were surprised that it's viewed as such a chill wave, kind of mellow album, because to them, they thought, and this was a quote, it was more, they felt like when they were making it at the time, that it was heavier, and the chord changes and progressions were interesting and unusual, like, and they even referenced Nirvana at the time. They felt it was heavier. And why? Because to us, we do sit there and go like, oh, but it's such a, it's like an album that you just kind of chill. Like I talked about, looking out the window, film noir. But it's interesting because I went through it, I listened to it with new ears after reading that quote, and I found the spots. I found the moments. And perfect example would be Strangers. The next song. That thumping beat at the beginning is apparently an element of an organ compressed with the beat. And it just comes in so powerfully and then drops out in that silence as Beth kind of sings like she's in the distance, and then it comes all back in. And that was heavier when I listened to it, thinking about what they were talking about, because they said, maybe if you didn't grow up where they did and part of the clubs and the dance music scene, but if you'd been out all night partying and dancing and you were calming down from that, this music wouldn't feel like chill. It would feel like it was still part of that all night party. And you really hear it on Strangers. Like when I listened to this song, I suddenly envisioned like a high-speed camera moving through a dance club at night where there's like fluorescent lights, and it's like high speed, right? And everything's still very much trippy and involved, and that's the feeling I got. And I was like, oh, it is heavier than I remember. It is darker and has more energy. It's not a coffee table album. It's got so much more depth and complexity. Not that I ever thought it was, but that's what Portishead and a lot of the trip hop got minimized to in the 90s, was like, it's really nice for coffee houses, just kind of mellow. You know what people put on now? They put on like lo-fi playlists, which I love. You can like read and get things done, and it's just unobtrusive. But this isn't meant to be unobtrusive. It is obtrusive in a great way. But the opening of Strangers, the sample there at the beginning, is from the band Weather Report's Elegant People. You can go hear that, the saxophone, Wayne Shorter playing that intro right there. Now, Weather Report is going to come up again with the bass player, Jaco Pastorius. He'll come up on a later song, so I'll get back to that. But one part I love about Strangers is that twinkly little interlude in the middle where it kind of sounds like it's like a TV, it's like a 60s television show, and then it just drops right back in. I love that part. Then we get to It Could Be Sweet, the first song that they wrote. I already talked about that one, about how this was Jeff and Beth coming together and writing their songs, and this was the piece of music. I will say about this song, It Could Be Sweet, when you listen to it with that understanding, you do hear it's a little different. It sounds pre what Portishead will become, because it has this great beat that sounds like it was put together on a synthesizer. And there's a Nana Cherry, like what Jeff Barrow is working on at the time. They're writing in the kitchen. There's that, it has this feel to it that you go, it isn't quite fully developed as a Portishead once Adrian's involved. It's like pre him. So of course they added touches and things to it. But if you listen to it knowing that it was the first piece of music, it's like whenever you hear a song from a band and you go, this is before they really kind of understood what their sound could be. Not that it's lacking, but you know what I mean? Now we get to Wandering Star. This is my favorite song on Dummy. This is my absolute favorite. And it's simple. It's really simple because those keyboard tones together, it's a very simple idea. The dissonance of going up and then back down with that tone always stuck with me. And just the way this song is put together, Wandering Star, it's absolutely, it's the song that if you got a mixtape from me for for music, I would have definitely put Wandering Star on there. This would be on there. I think a lot of people's pick is Glory Box, but I don't know. Love that song too, but for me, Wandering Star. So we get to It's a Fire. It's a Fire. Now this is really kind of Beth Gibbons' solo, and only I mean that she had assembled together some samples on tape and she provides vocals on top of it. And of course they add their instrumentation. They have the beats and the drums and the bass, and Adrian and Jeff are contributing on it. But it really, as I found, was like her piece that she puts together. And there's an organist on it that Jeff had said in interviews. He said every time the organist would record a part, he'd be like, try to be more sneaky. But this is the song It's a Fire. This is those weird chord changes, those unusual changes in key that they were equating more to their contemporaries at the time, the rock and the Nirvana, the things that were coming out there. I feel like this is where you really hear it from parts that are going from one to the next. You go, oh, okay, I can see kind of what they're talking about right here. Then we get to Numb, another one that really opens with such a spy movie sound. That Eastern European Cold War spy sound, which I love. I love that. I would love to one day be in a noir spy thriller. I just think it would be so fun, like a black and white. Oof, maybe I have to make one, huh? That's what I got to do. But one of the funny stories behind this song, Numb, is they're in the studio, it's all coming together and they're producing it together. And they're trying such unusual experimental things at the time. Things that will go on to become more normalized by other producers and people trying new things, but they're putting it together. And so Adrian Etley has been working and producing for a long time. He's a session musician. He's worked with tons of artists. And at the time he's working with, there were a few names that they listed, but one of them that stood out to me was Jeff Beck, guitar player Jeff Beck. And he walks into there and he's playing them some of Numb, of what he's working on with Portishead. And they just don't get it. They're just, everybody in the room, he said, you could tell they thought, what the hell is this? One of them even saying, your snare drum sounds like a tin can. And they're using this as an insult. And Adrian's like, it does. Yes. He's so excited that it sounds like a tin can because he knows he's doing something different and he's trying something different. And it's got to be so exciting when the room looks at what you're making and they don't get it. I mean, maybe it's scary too. We've talked about when I had Tim Casher from Cursive on here, he talked about how difficult it was when he put that album together because it was scary, because he liked it, but it's like a scary, vulnerable thing. So Adrian's reaction to this is nice. It sounds like a tin can. I think if I'd been in that situation and I was playing music for people that I really respected musically and they're like, this is weird. I don't know. I don't know. I probably would start second guessing things. I don't know. I'm 46. Maybe when I was younger, it would have been harder. But now I feel like I'd go, I don't know. I've just read so many things about, David Bowie saying if it's not scary and you're not pushing yourself, all these artists that say you've got to just do what you like, what inspires you. And I hope that's a reminder to you out there. If you're creating something and nobody gets it, but you like it, keep doing it. Keep doing it. That's all that matters. If you like it, if it sparks joy, is that show that was so popular for a while about getting rid of your clothes in your closet. All right. So then we'll get on to Roads. Probably one of the more beautiful, haunting, sorrowful songs on the album. It's a beautiful piece of music. Very, very cinematic. This is definitely one that, stare out that window, let the rain fall. It was inspired by Assault on Precinct 13, which is a John Carpenter film from the 70s. I had never seen the film, but it, looked like a movie about a bunch of hooligans and troublemakers and gangs attacking a police station and there being gunfights and whatnot. But Portishead said that there was a very specific scene, which I looked up, that was one of the inspirations for this piece of music. And in the film, there's an ice cream truck, and these gangs are running rampant on the street. These gangs are going up and mugging people and killing people just at random. And it's really dark. And this little girl is buying ice cream, and she's just in the wrong place at the wrong time and gets shot. And I can't even imagine what people thought when they saw that in the 70s. Now, sadly, especially as somebody who lives in the United States, these kind of horrible atrocities are so common that if you were to see this in a film now, while it would be horrifying, it would be like, well, this is oftentimes the reality that we live in, which is just fucking terrible that I have to say that. But it's true if you live here. You live in the United States. And for those of you who are in other parts of the world, you probably look at us and go, like, what is the deal with your country? And most of us are like, we don't know. Most of us are sick of it. But not to make this about gun violence, but they inspire this song from that moment. It has this very 60s and 70s TV show, the strings. It's a beautiful song. Now we're getting arty. I'm moving. I'm impressed. I'm impressed that I've kept this going without too many tangents. I came in prepared to talk about the Portishead cookbook. Pedestal. Heavy beat coming in that one. Another heavy beat when I was listening to it again, and I was like, man, this is the grinding, the driving. It's, Portishead had some edge. Portishead has some edge in their albums. But to minimize them down to just this background music, just not having it. So one of the interesting stories, I said earlier, this would come back to Jaco Pastorius, the legendary bass player of Weather Report, who died tragically, very young, in the world of bass players, very well respected and well known and famous, a very iconic bass player and known for fretless bass. So what's interesting about Pedestal is Jeff Barrow is young and he's looking for work and he's trying to find session work and music work and he's desperate and he answers an ad that's looking for a fretless bass player and he's like, yes, I'm a fretless bass player. And he is not, but he has a bass, and so he takes all of the frets out of his bass. He removes them all so that he can get this job. And that is what kind of inspired that Jaco Pastorius sound of the fretless bass, because he eventually put the frets back in his bass. This happened when he was younger. But that bass riff is something that was written with that fretless feel, and that's what he lays in Pedestal, which I thought was very, very cool. We're nearing the end here. Biscuit. What a British title to have there. Biscuit. Spooky stutter with that beat at the beginning. That's very, very trip-hop. Just that kind of rhythm that feels like it's stopping and starting, or that there's something about the beat that feels irregular, right? That is what that feels like. This song, they had it come together very, very easily, but they didn't, it was missing something. They had the beat, they had the melody, they had the song, and they didn't know what it was. And it wasn't until they added Johnny Ray's I'll Never Fall in Love Again slowed down. They have the turntable and they slow them down, and it adds this very interesting kind of spooky element to Biscuit. And that's how they found this song with that sample. See? Cookbook. It's all these recipes coming together. Adrian coming in with the records, and Beth with her haunting voice, and Jeff with his sampling and interesting takes. That's what makes it. Adrian talked about his guitar playing on the album and how trebly it was. And I when I was listening with those ears, just, wah-wahs completely pushed forward, just really giving such a trebly sound, that spy sound. And then we close out the album with Glory Box, which is an interesting thing because this is sampled from Isaac Hayes' Ike's Rap No. 2. And at the same time, at this trip-hop era, Tricky samples from this album as well and does the song Hell's Around the Corner. And then they do Glory Box. Very different songs, lyrically and stylistically, but with this same background. So you can go listen to the Tricky one, and then you can listen to the Portishead one. You can hear the similarities and the differences from these both prominent trip-hop artists coming up at the same time. All coming from this wild bunch, right? Now, they said that the record that they had with Ike's Rap No. 2 was not a record in good condition. It had even been left out in the sun. So there's a little warp to it. It didn't wobble on the turntable, but it's not well made. And they're just playing the record, and Isaac is singing in there some places, but it's just not as audible because what they're doing on it. But I would say that Glory Box definitely has, this is the slink. This is the sensual, because the way that she says, I've been a temptress for too long. There's something about that you can feel, that kind of slink through the room, hiking up the side of the long dress, the gown, something like that. A dame, an old noir film. But this is one of the songs that if you look it up, you can see an enormous amount of people listen to this one. So they might be putting it on for different reasons. I did forget to mention earlier that on the song Numb, the one that had the drum that sounds like a tin can, they also sampled Ray Charles' I've Got a Woman in there. You can hear it. So yeah, there was a lot of things. Oh, and on Wandering Star, the scratch solo that is in Wandering Star is from War's Magic Mountain. So I had so many notes on this one because, like I said, it's fascinating when you go through this album and this band and how they came together. I wanted to see if there was anything else in my notes that I thought would be. I talked about the symbolum. I talked about all these things. Hauntology. Yeah, I did it. I did it, y'all. That was these episodes where I dig into an album. It's tricky, right? Because I have a lot of information in my head about the artist, about my experience with it. But when you get and you start to kind of do a deep dive and listen to the songs and want to understand it more, it's just amazing how I want to experience them and share them with you in different ways. Because thematically, Portishead's Dummy had its involvement in my life in the 90s in a couple different ways. One was just funny recently. I have a bunch of VHS tapes from my childhood, high school videos, old Smashing Pumpkins recordings, things I taped off the TV, old home movies. And I recently got an old CRT television, and I hooked up a VCR player, and I started playing some of my old tapes. And I got to show my children some of the silly movies that I made with my friends. We used to go to my grandma's, my Mima, and we used to record these movies in her back. So she had this house in North Tulsa, and behind in her backyard, she had this tiny separate little house, and it didn't have a bathroom or anything. It was just this structure that my pawpaw used as his office when he was alive. But once he died, Mima took it over and put all of her country crafts out there, put all of her dolls and things that she was making, doilies, very, this is Tulsa, Oklahoma grandmother, my Mima. And she would just make these little country crafts. So my friends and I, we were like 14, 15, right around that time. We would have sleepovers in my grandma's office, country craft room. And we'd borrow her camcorder and we would tape these home movies. And the first one we ever make is called Killer Country Crafts from Venus. And it's because we're sitting around the room, we're just clowning around. We were good kids. We weren't, relative. So what I mean is like, we weren't like drinking and doing drugs. We were very, very young and we were just silly. We're just goobers. And we're looking around the room and we see, these country crafts and how they're kind of horrifying. And so we decide we're going to make this dumb parody of like an old 70s B movie, drive-in movie called Killer Country Crafts from Venus. Anyway, I bring all this up to say I'm going through the tape and I'm watching these old movies. And if I can't wait to show you and everyone some of these movies because the soundtrack in 1994 93, when I'm making these, has all the music that I talk about. Like if I ever needed to have a actual physical proof to say, yes, I was listening to Portishead Dummy when I was at this age, because it's playing in the video. We literally have a scene where I'm playing Pedestal. And I was like, holy shit, there it is, 1994, I'm playing Pedestal. This is other thing that we're doing, Morphine. Cure for Pain is playing. And then it's Jane's Addiction. It was validation for me. You know what I mean? Because like I've been listening to great music that I love since I was very young. And I felt like it was important back then. And it was nice to see young Jacob just putting it in these silly home movies, putting these pieces of music as cinematic choices. So it's funny because when I think about Portishead's Dummy, I often think about a scene from a homemade silly movie that's playing Pedestal as I'm walking through. And it makes me really happy. And because Mezzanine and Massive Attack's album came out in 1998, I was a little older. So maybe that's why it has such a different meaning for me. Maybe if I discovered Portishead when I was leaving my adolescent years and entering into adulthood, maybe it would have had such a different response in my life. And that may be the case for you too, depending on when the album lands in your lap. I've talked about it time and time again. You know what I mean. If you get an album when you're 8, it's very different than you get it when you're 18. And it's very different when you get it when you're 28. No one can ever say that this is better than that album. Nobody can ever fucking do that. And if they do, it's annoying because it's impossible to say this is better than that. Because in music, because they don't know you, they didn't live your life, they didn't walk in your shoes, they didn't experience the way things are. And so if Dummy lands in your life in a specific way that you're like, it is the best trip hop album of all time. It makes me feel all the feels. It makes me love. It makes me feel lost. It makes me feel hope. It makes me feel desperation. It makes me feel sad. It makes me feel angry. It makes me feel horny. Whatever it is, just depends on when you got it, right? Just depends on when you got it. Because Portishead's second album is amazing. Third is amazing. I love all of this band's work, and I've always been a fan. I'd love to see him live, but the impact that these albums have on your life belong to you and you alone. Don't you forget it. I love not being a music gatekeeper. I will go to the grave never being a pretentious music gatekeeper. What's the point? Love what you love, dude. Some of these channels out there, some of these TikToks and Instagrams with their music guys, and they just sit there and talk about what they think is good and bad and what sucks. Not for me, dude. Not for me. If you want to have a conversation about what music I don't enjoy, if you want to have that conversation, you got to be my friend and you got to be, if you want to be my lover, you got to get with my friends. You got to sit with me. You got to hang out. That's the only way you're going to ever hear that stuff is if we're friends. Because then I can talk to you. I can be like, oh, you know what? I personally don't really enjoy that. Or that's not for me. Or I don't get it. Or oh, I don't like that band, whatever. I will say that to you if we're friends, but what's the point in putting that out there in the world? I just don't know. I don't know. Have you made an album? Critics. Anyway, tangent. I couldn't resist it at the end. Resist it at the end, but that was Portishead's Dummy. And thank you for joining me for another episode of Waterproof Records. I do love doing this. This was a fun one. Sometimes when I give myself a break and I just chill, I have such a better time if I'm not stressing about getting this done. And it may also have to do with the fact that I'm not burning alive in this space. I'm nice and cool. But have a wonderful rest of your day, your evening, your night, your weekend, wherever you're going next. Thank you for spending time with me. I always love to have your ear for a bit. It's special. And thank you to Pantheon Podcasts for letting me be a part of the network and helping me grow this show and spread the good music to the world. Because most of you who tune in probably know these albums. But for those of you who listen to my show because you want to learn more about albums, welcome. I'm glad you're here. Thank you, Pantheon Podcasts. You rule. You make it so much easier for me to get this podcast heard by more people. And I'm excited to see where we're going to go in the future. So thank you for supporting me and letting me be a part of the network. I have launched a new store in TeePublic. I'm now selling some cool shirts. So if you've never checked those out before, I just launched a new one. It was a comment that somebody left on TikTok that they said about the younger version of themselves getting a chance to spend time with their older version while listening to music. And I messaged this person and I said, I love this concept. I'm going to kind of rework your phrasing and put it on a shirt. Are you okay with that? And they were like, oh, of course. You absolutely can do that. So it was a comment, but I took it and turned it into a shirt. And then I have a couple other shirts on there, the Waterproof Records shirt. And I have a more specific one that was an art piece done by an artist in Mexico, Lady Love. She did a design for me. And I have Music is Everywhere, which is my tattoo. I have a couple shirts. I'm going to be doing more. I'm going to be making more stuff, but it's on TeePublic. I'll try to put the link in the bio. And last but not least, don't forget to check out distrokid.com/VIP/waterproof. Get that 30% off your first year. But I have been your fearless host, Jacob Givens, talking about Portishead's Dummy. Thanks again for spending time with me. I love you so much. I love doing this show, and I'll see you next time. Bye.
Things are gonna change, I can feel it.
If this gonna be that kind of party, I'm gonna
Waterproof Records. Waterproof